everybody. Good evening, everybody. Welcome on behalf of Kensal and Kilburn Better 2020. Our little group started out 4 years ago as Kensal and Kilburn Better 2017. My name is Tom London and I'm chairing this evening. A particular welcome and many thanks to our fantastic panel, Marcia Rigg, Deryck Murray, Gary Younge, Antonia Charles, and Muhammed Butt. 500 people have registered to attend, and we stopped it at 500, and more people wanted to listen. It's a very, very popular event. Our title today is Black Lives, White Privilege, a Community Discussion. On the 25th of May this year, George Floyd was killed by a policeman who suffocated him by kneeling on his neck for 8 minutes, 46 seconds. He did this in plain sight. That death, as we know, led to worldwide demonstrations. But none of the great, painful and burning issues raised by Mr. Floyd's death are, I think, new. A meaningful discussion of the issues raised by Black Lives Matter must also address necessarily the issue of white privilege. Slavery and the empire and plenty of other factors all impact on attitudes in 2020. In his book, Natives, Akala described a realization that came to him when he was very young. He wrote, "I somehow knew instinctively that whiteness, like all systems of power, preferred not to be interrogated." And when I read that, I thought that's a fair point. And an important point. Now, I need to tell you that this event will be recorded. We welcome questions. Please use the Q&A, and we'll try and reach as many questions as we can. The format is that each speaker will speak for no more than 6 minutes, please, and we'll take questions after all the speakers. Speakers will then make closing comments, and we aim to finish at 8 o'clock. So I'm now going to introduce the first speaker, who is Marcia Rigg. Marcia has campaigned to get justice for her brother, Sean Rigg, who died after he was restrained while in the custody of the Metropolitan Police in August 2008. She also works with the United Families and Friends campaign, a coalition of those affected by deaths in police, prison and psychiatric custody. Marcia.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you for listening and thank you for joining us this evening. And thank you also, Tom, for inviting me to speak on the webinar to an audience that I've probably never spoken to before. Anyway, my name's Marcia. I'm the sister of Sean Rigg, who also died in police custody in the United Kingdom. So we're talking about George Floyd, whose death was caught on camera, and raised the issue of Black Lives Matter and the protests in the US and worldwide. And a lot of people were protesting in the United Kingdom for the US deaths. But I'm here to tell everybody that there are so many deaths that actually happen in the UK, and my brother was one of them. So in August 2008, Sean was having a psychotic episode where there were some erratic emergency 999 calls being made by his mental health team, the South London and Maudsley in Brixton, and his hostel team where he was staying. The police refused to come, and then Sean went into the streets, naked from the waist up and actively psychotic. And he was making karate stances to the members of the public and going in and out the middle of the street, and he could have been knocked over. He was a danger to himself and a danger to the public. And members of the public could see that Sean was unwell as well. And they called the police, and the police responded to their call. Now, 4 officers apprehended Sean, where there is witness evidence of the 4 officers on top of Sean's torso at the back. He was handcuffed to the rear, and then one of the officers left to go and get the vehicle, and an officer can be seen in a photograph where he's at the top of Sean's neck area and the back, and one is at his feet. And the jury at the inquest in 2012 found that he was in that position, face down, prone, for up to 8 minutes. It was later reconstructed for a criminal investigation, and they said 7 minutes. But 7 minutes of being restrained using excessive force by officers in grass is too long, because Sean would not have been able to breathe. He was then driven at speed to Brixton Police Station, the back of a caged vehicle, where the officers claimed that Sean was upside down on his back, spinning 360 degrees with his feet around the walls of the cage whilst being handcuffed. But a jury in 2012 found that he would have been in the V position the whole time and would have been in and out of consciousness due to positional asphyxiation from the restraint. And once Sean is arrived at the station, he's kept in the back of a van for 11 minutes and then brought into Brixton Police Station at the entrance of the custody suite, where he's collapsed within seconds, and he would not have been able to make that walk by himself. And Sean actually dies on camera at the feet of Brixton police officers, 4 or 5 officers, in a cramped cage, where it was 20 minutes before a police doctor was brought to Sean. It was basically, Sean was dead within an hour of being arrested by the police, and he never regained consciousness, and he died at the station. There then ensued, for the next 11 years, an inquest which found that the restraint contributed to Sean's death, and the fact that nothing happened to him, they didn't do anything to help him at the station, also contributed to his death. And the case was reopened, and there was a criminal investigation by the IPCC. The Crown Prosecution Service found that there was insufficient evidence for any prospect of conviction of any of the officers. There was also last year the gross misconduct hearing, which also exonerated all the officers of any wrongdoing. Now, in the United Kingdom, Sean's case is not an isolated case. There are many other deaths where there's been 0 convictions. In fact, in the United Kingdom, there have been 10 or 11, I think, unlawful killing verdicts, but never a conviction. And the inquest system that we have, the coroner's court, is not a criminal jurisdiction. And so families are not really afforded accountability of causing the death of their loved one. And there is institutional racism, because also there is a disproportionality of young Black men, particularly with mental health, being killed in police custody in the United Kingdom. We've had numerous reports and reviews over the years. There's been the Scarman report, there's been the Lamy report, there's been the Macpherson report, and many other reports. I believe there's about 50 reports over the years in the United Kingdom, and none of the recommendations have been implemented, because the fact of the matter is that people are still dying in custody. And why is that? The bar is set so high that for police officers, for a criminal, to the criminal standard, that it is impossible for any family to reach that bar, and it sends a clear message that officers can act with impunity and go away unpunished after a death in police custody in the UK.
Thank you, Marcia. That's obviously very powerful and moving to hear about your brother, and it's very concerning to hear about the seeming impunity that you mentioned for the police officers when there are deaths in custody. I'm now going to introduce Dr. Deryck Murray, who is joining us all the way from Barbados. Dr. Murray is the director of the Center for Hybrid Studies and a lecturer in science, medicine, and technology in society at the University of the West Indies. He is the former director of the Government of Barbados's Commission for Pan-African Affairs. Deryck.
I thank you, Tom, and I bring greetings from Barbados to Brent. We're just about the same size, just under the population of Brent, and we're an entire nation. We are about 92% Black, though. The white population is about just under 3%. And therefore we have slightly different issues to deal with. But I want to address the problem of the commonality between what happened to George Floyd and the Windrush scandal that happened in the UK. And, you know, it's important and it's commendable that already the Brent community has a 10-step plan to address the ills in the inequalities in the Black community. And that would have been precipitated by what happened in terms of the George Floyd, and I suspect the Windrush scandal as well. Now, the challenge that I have, I think one omission, I suspect that the 10-step plan has, is that it does not address the problem of the cultural or pervasive racism that exists in the white community. And it's a racism that's embedded, it's a racism that's pervasive, it's a racism that is potent mostly because it is invisible. And when it is visible, it is denied. So you have a situation where the you know, white privilege, because it is invisible, is so problematic because it's not a question of policy and laws, or merely a question of policy and laws. As was said in the lessons learned report on the Windrush scandal, they made it clear that it's not just a question of policies and laws. It's also, it is fundamentally a question of racism, fundamentally a question of culture. It's interesting though that they weren't able to say definitively that the root of the Windrush scandal, for example, would have been racism, just as it has been extremely difficult to prove racism, institutional racism, in the United States and the UK, because it operates very often at the level of the unconscious. You know, much of what I'm going to say does not really apply to those inveterate, knowing, willful racists, because there's not much that we can do with them apart from ask God to help and use force. It really applies to those people in the white community who are interested in taking an empathetic, loving, inclusive approach to dealing with the problem of racism. So let me suggest that the plan, the 10-step plan that Brent has, should really, in addition to those practical programs and policies, address the question of culture. What it means for a white person to appreciate what it is to be Black. And I want to suggest to you that at the root of that is the question that gained some prominence in the 70s with the Black Power movement, but I think they took it as merely a cosmetic issue when it's really a fundamental ontological issue. And that's the question of beauty. And one of your own philosophers, Alfred North Whitehead, held the position that at the bottom of our ontology really is the notion of beauty. The things that we find beautiful, we include. The things that we find ugly, we exclude. And it is a reality that in the white community, the white ideal of beauty is what is held to be, the white ideal is what is held to be beautiful. And unfortunately, that has been reproduced amongst many Blacks as well. So we hold everything white to be beautiful, everything Black to be ugly. This is important because it means that what we teach our children, the materials, the methods, the language, and everything that we use to teach our children, says to them repeatedly through film, through language, through images, that they're not beautiful. As soon as they leave the womb, or even before, Black children are told that they're not beautiful in their own skin unless they do something else. Now, that may seem like a cosmetic issue at first, but it soon manifests itself in a lack of self-esteem. So the self-esteem is pretty much dead by the time they're 11. And this is problematic because then it leads to a problem with confidence, and it leads to issues with education. It leads to all types of other issues that are not really taken into consideration when we're dealing with non-performance. In a white community, the question is how willing would the white educators, white leaders be to go through the trouble of understanding the impact that that images, language, and so on would have on Black children in their formative years. And so I think that we need to deal with that issue, and that's a cultural issue, as well as the problem of the invisibility of white privilege. The reason why the George Floyd issue became so potent is because it was made visible by the technology and the brave people who were willing to record and upload the actual act, and also by the camcorders that the police are made to wear now. And the reason why the Windrush scandal became so problematic and had to be dealt with eventually is because the Guardian newspaper and our comrade Gary made sure that what was being done quietly was made visible. And we need to systematically find ways to make white privilege visible and make sure that our educators and our leaders understand what white privilege is and what it means to not to damage the self-esteem of Black children using the images and the programming that that's so pervasive in the culture.
Thank you, Deryck. That's fascinating and really important. I'm very grateful to you for saying all that. I now introduce Professor Gary Younge. He's an award-winning author, broadcaster, and academic. Formerly a journalist and columnist at The Guardian, he's now a professor of sociology at Manchester University, and he's written 5 very excellent books. Thank you, Gary.
Thanks, Tom, and thank you all for coming. I want to take my 6 minutes to kind of draw a connection between the pervasive nature of racism as it's experienced as daily experience, and the most brutal manifestations, as with George Floyd or with Sean Rigg, Marcia's late brother, and others, and to do that through COVID and the experiences that we have had in the Black community, both here and elsewhere, minority communities actually pretty much all over the world, if they are also oppressed. So with George Floyd, we had the most brazen form of racism, the knee on the neck, the man with the badge, a clear morality play that could be recorded and shared and could shock and appall, and I didn't watch it, and I didn't watch it because I couldn't watch it because I'd heard it described, and that was enough for me. But beyond that, I always have a concern with these things that people think that that is racism. That's it. That or people Sieg Heiling or the Ku Klux Klan or whatever it is, that the kind of that it is these kind of outward performative manifestations of bigotry and their most violent expressions, that is racism. And of course it is racism, but it's not most people's experience of racism, actually. And most people's experience of racism is actually reflected much more in why we are so much more likely, 4 times more likely, accounting for 8, to die from COVID-19, which is the much more first of all, a material manifestation of racism, that we are Pakistani and Bangladeshis and then Caribbeans are more likely to be in crowded housing, more likely to have to work, more likely to be in jobs like security guards or taxi drivers, more likely to, for reasons, historical reasons of immigration, to be nurses or on public transport. And therefore, at every stage, the most likely to be at whatever, at the bottom of any pile that you may choose. So we don't just fall foul of the law of the land, we fall foul of the law of probabilities. We are more likely for everything that would make us more prone to COVID. And that's the material stuff. And then you have the kind of, if you like, the qualitative stuff, because people have said, well, what about the doctors? You know, they're not poor. It's like, well, they're not poor, but first of all, the disproportionate number of Black and Asian doctors who died, well, they are Black and Asian, which means that they are still more likely to live in those areas where COVID-19 spread. They're still more likely to be poorer than their white colleagues, but they're also more likely to be reported if they do something wrong. They are more likely to be disciplined. They are less likely to be in management positions. And so guess who gets what shift? Guess who feels empowered or doesn't feel empowered to make a statement, or to say, well, I'm not doing that because I don't have PPE, or to say, I'm not going to work on that ward, it's not safe. And so there is also then that kind of qualitative thing of who has the confidence, the currency to actually challenge the power system. And you put all that together and you have a very clear systemic form of racism, where a range of processes built on presumption and assumption, confidence, ignorance, exclusionary, institutional, personal, professional networks, and they're all buttressed by white privilege. All of those things are buttressed by white privilege, and they make us more prone. Now, you put together the brazen, the brutal, the violent of George Floyd or Sean Rigg, and the banal, the daily, the routine, the lived experience that gives us COVID. COVID will kill more of us, has killed more of us than the police ever will. Which doesn't mean that the police isn't a problem, but it's important to understand them together if we're going to understand how racism operates. That it's not always a thing you can look at and share with a clear morality play. Sometimes it is the dead weight of the statistical drumbeat of decades, if not centuries, of privilege on one side and discrimination on the other. And when we talk about Black Lives Matter, we're talking about all of it. We're not just talking about some of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gary. The distinction between the brazen and the brutal, and then the banal and the daily, is obviously incredibly important. I now introduce Antonia Charles, who has had her own law firm on the South Kilburn estate for 15 years. She personally deals with a wide range of criminal work. She's an activist in Black Lives Matter. And last week, she was on the shortlist to be named Legal Aid Lawyer of the Year. Antonia.
Thank you, Tom. Welcome, everyone. I want to talk about the institution of racism, especially when me and my business partner opened my firm in the South Kilburn area in 2006. The reason why I opened the firm in 2006 on the estate, because I lived on the estate, I was born and brought up on the estate. When I was growing up, I noticed a lot of police harassing the young black boys, you know, arresting them, putting handcuffs on them. At the time, then it was sus, the law called sus, the Vagrants Act. And they would just come into the estate, you know, gang up on these boys, grab them up, put handcuffs. I always said, I want to be a lawyer and I want to stop it. So I came back 2006 to the same estate, nothing changed. Officers still running up on the estate, grabbing these young boys. Now, our windows, we can see clearly what's going on. So we would rush out to the officers, what's going on? What's going on? Why are you arresting them? What is the reasonable excuse? None. We don't have to give them. I said, yes, you do. Under the PACE, Criminal Evidence Act, you have to give them reasonable excuse. Then they started threatening us, saying, go back in the office or we're going to arrest you for obstructing. We'd say, under what law? Just go back, we're going to arrest you. And they started disrespecting us in front of the clients. You know, we brought it to the inspector, duty inspector complained every single minute. We then got a bad name, MTC. Their solicitors, oh, the police, you know, we had police saying things to our clients that were not good, don't get them, if they got arrested in custody, it went on and on and on. And we complained, nothing was being done. One day I went to the police station and I was representing a client at Kilburn Police Station. And one of the officers said to me, you've got another client at Wembley Police Station. So I said, okay, let me deal with the Kilburn one, then I'll go to the Wembley. Officer said, we're dealing with that same client in Wembley. We'll give you the disclosure, go over there and go and deal with him and we'll let the jailer let you in. So I said, okay, fine. It was a white client, white mum waiting for me. The one in Kilburn was a black client, white client. Went over there, mum was outside waiting for me. Called down to the jailer, asked him to let me in. Me and mum sat in the consultation room waiting for the client to come in. Sergeant busted open the consultation room. What are you doing here? And I said, what do you mean? Why are you here? I said, I'm here to represent the client. No, you're not. Get out. And I said, excuse me, I'm here with the mum. You know, ask mum. I don't care what the mum's got to say. Get out. And I said, what reason? He said, you're touting. I said, how am I touting? I'm here with the client's mum. How am I touting? He says, get out. I don't care. He ejected me from the custody. When I got into the custody suite, it was packed. There was about 8 officers standing there. You know, paramedics was there. I was so embarrassed. I went outside. I called what we call is the defense center. And I said to them, I've been ejected from the custody suite. Have we got a reference number to represent this client? Because he's one of my clients. They said, yes. I said, can you call that custody sergeant and ask him to let me back in? Eventually, I got back in. He didn't apologize. He didn't say sorry. The officers that was in Kilburn met me there. They kind of apologized, but, you know, it was terrible. All officers was laughing. I then said I was going to make an official complaint. I made an official complaint to the inspector. The inspector said to me, maybe he was having an off day. He was having a bad day that day, you know. I then done a little bit of researching on this officer and found out that I wasn't the first one that he had problems with in my office. He'd done it to my other staff, which complaints had gone through. So I said, I'm going to take this further. You know, the CCTV, it was appalling behavior. You know, we wrote to the inspector, said we want the CCTV, we want to make an official complaint. You know, we continued, we got ignored. So in the end, I got a white solicitors firm to deal with it. That's where the white privilege comes in. Got a white solicitors firm to deal with it. I had to pay for it, but I got a white solicitors firm to deal with it. We got CCTV. Not only did the CCTV show me getting ejected, it showed when I was outside how the officers was criticizing MTC, our firm. They were laughing at me. They were saying all kind of derogatory things in front of everybody. This sergeant, it was appalling. You know, the white solicitor said, oh, we got to take this further. We complained to the IPCC. It went further. IPCC saw the video and was appalled by it and said the officer has to, you know, be gross misconduct. So that went further. We had a meeting for his gross misconduct. Lo and behold, who came down? Superintendent came down to have a meeting with the IPCC was there, my solicitor was there. I was sitting there with my business partner. So superintendent comes walking in, both him and the sergeant smiling. And he goes, oh, I think this is just, you know, miscommunication. You know, I don't think we should go this far by giving a misconduct. I will just give him a management course. And that's it. It ends here. This is when I knew that we, you know, will never get nowhere with the police as long as we live. You know, it was terrible. He should have been sacked. You know, he goes on to be, he's gone on to be an inspector, which I think is terrible. You know, he from then on, you know, he didn't let our clients call us when they needed to call us. You know, we continued to complain and complain and complain. The good thing about it, he was removed from that custody area and gone on to somewhere else. But, you know, we struggled. You know, we've been here for 15 years, but it wasn't easy. You know, we had police officers, you know, were going outside being so disrespectful, and it has to change. You know, and I don't think colour should matter, especially when you're doing your job and you're trying to represent people, you know, to the best ability. They're doing a job. And I always say that to them, you're doing a job, we're doing a job, let us get on with it. You know, I'm also going to talk about the Windrush situation. We also deal with a lot of clients on the Windrush basis. My colleague, Naga, he is an expert on it. In 2017, client came to see us about Windrush experience. He worked for a certain council for 44 years. They came to him and said, you can't work here no more because you need your status. You need papers to confirm your status. He was like, what are you talking about? I'm British. I've been here, you know, most of my life. I've been living here. What are you talking about? And they said, well, no, you need to get your papers. You know, he came to us and my colleague looked into the matter and said, I don't understand what you're talking about. We went to the MPs, speak to MPs about it. You know, what papers are they looking for? He's been working for 44 years. We then said, we're going to take it further. We went to barristers. This is when it first started happening, first Windrush. The barristers weren't interested. They were like, oh, you know, try and get him to do the 20 years rule, you know, 20 years rule, because he's been in this country, we'll, you know, give him a 20 years rule. That cost £2,000 to apply for. You know, he had a minimal job, not getting much wage. Where is he getting £2,000 from? You know, we went on again to press with other barristers. No one would help. In the end, my colleague decided to go and speak to Boris Johnson, of all people. And, you know, he had a meeting with him and the meeting went quite well. We then complained to the Guardian. That also went quite well. And eventually, you know, he got the paperwork that he needed. But it was a struggle. And we've had several more clients that are struggling. You know, they're going to high street firms and not getting the money. The high street firms are asking them for lots of money to get, you know, paid for. We are now doing it pro bono. We are now helping getting their paperwork for them. A lot of them have suffered. You know, it took a toll when it was, let me just check the name, Deryck Bristol.
Antonia, I think you're going to have to wind up quite soon.
Okay. Deryck Bristol, the last person who died regarding the Windrush. And that's when everybody started taking notice, you know, and that's it.
Antonia, thank you so much. I used to be a criminal lawyer on the Kilburn High Road many years ago, and you're absolutely right. That would never have happened to me.
No,
never would happen to me. I've been in those police stations.
It's
a shocking story. Shocking.
Absolutely shocked.
And of course, Windrush is an unbelievably shocking story.
I've
now introduced Muhammed Butt, who is leader of Brent Council, which is our local council here. Brent is, as he may mention, one of the most diverse boroughs in the country. It's obviously a huge job, and we greatly appreciate it that you've taken the time to be with us this evening.
Tom, thank you. And first of all, I just want to say to all the speakers who've gone before me, thank you for your contributions. It's actually sort of, I think, probably changed my my contribution. I was just taking a look at the title, actually, Black Lives. I'm glad that we're actually saying the word black, right? Because sometimes we have been diluting some of the issues, right, by using the word BAME, right, and it doesn't actually reflect that the issues and the concerns that we have within the black community that we actually need to address. And then we talk about white privilege, and you know, Marcia, you were talking about your brother. And one of the things, right, that sort of absolutely sort of highlighted some of the issues and the concerns around that white privilege actually hit home only a few weeks ago when we had the tragic death of those two young women in Friend Country Park. And you know, the sanctity of life, right, what was absolutely destroyed by two police officers, right, who decided, right, that even at the time of the death of those two women, they decided to take pictures of those two women, two black women, I need to say, right, and to use those pictures to pass it around. And for me, that just summed it all up. That white privilege, right? They had that confidence, right, that they were able to take those pictures of those women at that precise moment in time, right, and to share those pictures. It just demonstrated the power, the authority, the confidence that they had over those two black women who had been so brutally murdered. And just going forward on that, so some of the conversations that I've been in with the Mayor of London in relation to some of the issues that we've been facing, and people have touched on how black men and people get arrested, how they are treated, and the treatment that Antonia, that you received in relation to how you were treated. And you know, honestly, right, the people who were in that room with us, with Sadiq, right, honestly, I came out of that room traumatized. That's the only word that I could actually use that actually exemplifies, right, the feeling within that room, the way the people were treated, and if we don't get to grips, right, with the issues that we're talking about in relation to racism, and trying to tackle some of those structural inequalities that we've been talking about. People have touched on the Windrush generation, right? And if you take a look at the lessons learned recommendations that came out only a few weeks ago, but then a week or so ago, right, a bombshell came out, right, that those people who were impacted, right, by the Windrush scandal, and the individuals who lost their jobs, then had to prove beyond reasonable doubt, right, the loss of income. How can we, right, then start using legal terms and then say we want to right the wrongs, right, that were wronged, right, and then make it so much harder for that community, right, to come forward when they've already have lost their dignity, they've lost their hope, they've lost their aspirations, their families and their family networks have been destroyed, and then to pour salt into that wound and say, beyond reasonable doubt. How the heck are people going to prove that beyond reasonable doubt? If they had a job that was paying 25,000, right? Well, that's beyond reasonable doubt. And then how can they sort of demonstrate 9 years afterwards or something, right? What the loss has been? It's absolutely horrendous. Some of the issues that we've been talking about. But to be black, it's say in Brent, it means in relation to COVID, that you're 4 times more likely than a white counterpart to fall seriously ill. And to take a look at the number of deaths that we've just had around Harlesden and Church End, 36 people. Right, and that is a disproportionate number in relation to the population. To be a black child, right, is to be twice as likely to become the subject of a child protection plan. Twice as likely, my friends, right? Something is not right. In London, you're at least 5 times more likely than a white counterpart to be stopped and searched by a police officer, and 5 times more likely to be a homicide victim. And today we heard about the young person who was tragically shot this morning. Once again, it's absolutely horrendous that we're living in a society where sometimes the loss of life is not taken that seriously, and we absolutely need to make sure that we're putting the right focus. We've had 488 people have died in Brent in relation to COVID, and Gary, you touched on some of the issues. Housing. Okay, we're living in poor quality accommodation, the overcrowding issues, and the multi-generational factors that in our families. The frontline aspect of some of those people in those employments, working as the bus drivers and the train drivers, working as those minicab drivers. But don't forget, we have a lot of the people who came from the Windrush and then the future and in subsequent generations who are working in the care homes and in the care sector. They were the frontline key workers who had to go in, day out, 7 days a week, to look after the ones that who have been put in care and look after those individuals. The 10-point action plan, Deryck, I can absolutely assure you, right, that cultural aspect and the issue about people and the lived experiences, and how we need to make sure that the staff within our organization, in the council, right, at all levels, going all the way to the top, understand the culture of our communities, right, the heritage of our communities, right, but also the lived experiences, right, and by getting them to go out, to interact, to engage, to communicate, and to learn those lived experiences, right? That is one of the ways that we're absolutely focusing on making sure, right, that we learn some of those lessons. Education and the early year support, starting at the young stage, has to be absolutely critical. Making sure that opportunities and pathways are created for the Black community to progress through some of the organization at all levels, and making sure where individuals don't have the support at the moment, they are given that support through their career paths, so that they have that equal level pegging. One of the issues that has come up, right, has been in relation to community spaces, and where do people congregate, and one of the things that has been highlighted to me is that the community centers that people may have, or the churches that people may have, and the spaces within them. But what about the Black community, right? What opportunities have been given to them to have those opportunities to create the spaces for their community, for their future generations, to learn about their heritage and culture, and to make sure it's passed down, and not lost as well. One of and the last thing I just want to quickly focus on before the time runs out, I think it has to be about the support around employment and enterprise. A lot of people do want to go into business themselves. Okay, how can we make sure that we are creating the spaces, the workspaces, the incubator hubs, and then making sure that we are putting those workspaces and incubator spaces in the localities where the Black community actually thrives, and so that they can actually then make sure that support is absolutely there. And then obviously I want the accountability element, and it's no good. It's all good and well me making all these promises and the 10-point action plan, right? But I need that accountability. So how do I then report back to the community and to yourselves and say, this is what I've done in 6 months, this is what I've done in 12 months, and how I've engaged with that community to make sure that the hopes and the aspirations and the ambitions I have for myself and my family, I have for every single person, right, in our Black community as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Muhammed. That's obviously incredibly important what you've said. Thank you so much. So we've got now, I've got so many questions. I'm sorry if I was looking at my phone. That's because people are sending me the questions on my phone. There's so many questions. We can't possibly answer them all, but thank you everyone for the questions and comments. But I've chosen 3, and I really wanted to see if we can do these 3 questions in 10 minutes. So that means that all the answers have got to be quite snappy, I think, if that's possible. So the first question is from Fiona Frank. As a representative from Preston Windrush generation and descendants, I'd like to give my respect to all speakers and ask the panel, what specifics would you want from the government as reparations in relation to the historical and ongoing Black/African experiences from the police and the Windrush scandal? I'm not sure. I mean, Deryck, do you want to answer that? You're on mute. You're still on mute. Yeah.
Yes. Yes, I'd like to respond to that by starting with the lessons learned report, which came out March 19th, just a couple months before the George Floyd incident. And going through that lessons learned report, you'll see that the findings and the recommendations focus very much on culture. However, the lessons learned were the lessons learned by the government. They didn't include the lessons learned by Black people in the UK. And I think one of the lessons that any Black person in the UK should learn, would have learned from that, it's not a good lesson, is that regardless of how long you've been there, how well you speak English, as long as you're Black, you don't have a British accent, you're not really British. You're not really a full British citizen. That's one lesson that you learn. So the Windrush generation would have learned the hard way that until you're white and speak English with a particular British accent, you're not really British as yet. That's one lesson. And because of that, we have the question of how do you compensate people that you stripped of their identity and their nationality, having made a contribution. Now, of course, that question has to do with reparations, broad reparations, and we in the Caribbean and the diaspora, and those who've migrated to the UK, we have claims for reparations all the way back to 1627 in the case of Barbados. And our Prime Minister, Mayor Motley, has recently, a few days ago, reiterated our claim for reparations. But in terms of the more immediate reparations for the Windrush victims, I think that it is crucial that we recognize that when Muhammad said that they now had to prove something else again, they now have to prove others that they lost income, that is because they're not really British, and they're not white. And so we need to remember that, and we need to, so in terms of specifics and how to deal with that, we need to first remind the entire UK that British does not only mean white and speaking English with a British accent.
Thank you very much.
And secondly, that that no one should have to prove themselves twice. No victim should not have to prove themselves twice.
Thank you very much, Deryck. The next question may be for Antonia, but if you could be quick with your answer, that would be great. This is from Vivian Brosnahan. It strikes me that the police are of the opinion that they are untouchable. Antonia's experience demonstrates that. Their disregard and lack of respect is heightened now. I do not feel that recruiting more Black officers will address the issue. What is the answer? And you're on mute, and Antonia, you're on mute. You're still on mute. Steve,
Okay.
oh, yeah, that's great. I can hear you now. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I always believe that officers think they're untouchable, and they, go on and do what they want to do. They're all in a clique together. So if you try and complain against one, then the other one will stick up for the other one. So I don't know how it's going to change, to tell the honest truth. I agree with everything she said.
Okay, okay. The next question, perhaps for Gary and Marcia, it's from Deborah Coles, who I think is head of Inquest. There is a long line of reviews reporting on evidence of structural racism within state institutions. The evidence is all there, with hundreds of recommendations that have gathered dust. Does the panel have any confidence in the Race Commission, whose newly appointed chair rejects the notion of institutional racism? Gary, do you want to go first on that? You're on mute, Gary. Sorry, Gary, you're on mute.
So no, I don't have any confidence. That I think they're gaslighting us by putting these people in these positions, knowing full well that they're not going to deliver. And I think that Deborah's point is well taken, briefly, that kind of, with a lot of these things, there's no new information. It's not like we just found out that Rhodes was a colonialist and a bigot. That's not what happened. What happened was it was too much of a liability to keep him up than to take him down. Or they didn't just find out that Aunt Jemima was a problem or that taking a knee was a decent thing. It's not new information, it's new pressure. And what this period has shown us with Black Lives Matter is that the pressure works, or the pressure can work, but we have to sustain it. And we can't sustain it in the same way the whole time. We can't just be marching all the time. But that, in the words of Frederick Douglass, the abolitionist, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has and it never will.
Thank you, Gary. Marcia, do you want to comment on that one? And you're on mute.
Yes, I would. That's a very good question from Deborah, because the evidence is there that reviews on more reviews and further reviews, including now the current review of the Angelini review, we're just still waiting for the recommendations to be implemented. And in the meantime, people are still dying. So I have absolutely no confidence whatsoever in another review at all. It's not going to achieve anything new. Basically, what we need is a political will, a moral political will to change immediately, because it is at boiling point right now. We're talking about Black Lives Matter, we're talking about Windrush, we're talking about deaths in custody. It is a topic of discussion and it is urgent. And there is a strong public interest in this, and the government should be seen to be doing something more than another review. We don't need any more reviews whatsoever. The government is aware of the deaths happening in the UK. The government is aware in the inequality of arms in terms of legal aid, where agents of the state receive unlimited public funding from the purse, and yet families don't receive. We're heavily means tested. This is just another farce where it will cost the public money and it will be a total waste of funds. We need a political will to make officers accountable, to send a clear message that they cannot act with impunity.
Thank you, Marcia. One question for you, Muhammed, if I may. If you could answer this, it's a big question, but if you could answer it quickly, I'd be grateful. I mean, you're on mute. You're on mute as well. This is from Nahid Aslam. As our economy goes into financial meltdown, racism will get worse. What can we do to stop ourselves becoming victims of more abuse?
Okay, that is a big question. It goes back to just what Marcia just said in relation to that the political will. If the political will is there in order to make sure, right, that we're supporting our communities, right, and we're holding the people accountable who are supposed to be looking after us, right, then I think that some of that trust and confidence will come back into our own communities, right? And the one thing that we've always said in Brent is that the energies and the values and everything that all our different communities bring together in Brent is what actually can actually unite us, and the point about sort of culture, right? And if we don't understand who our neighbours are and what their background has been, I think we're not going to be able to tackle some of the issues we're talking about. So it has to be first and foremost, right? Making sure that we understand. And I mean the question about reparations is quite topical, isn't it? And quite relevant, right? Because if people have not understood what happened to the black community, right, you know, in the last 300-400 years, right, how will we actually move forward in relation to some of the issues we're talking about today? We have to acknowledge, right, so some of the wrongdoings that have taken place, and once we start doing that, I think that tension, that anger, right, won't subside. Right, what will happen is, right, you create an environment, right, where you can have those conversations, and the concerns and the issues about having review after review, right, is just going to make things you know, come to that boiling point again, because we're just going around in circles, right? So unless we start first acknowledge what's happened, but make sure, right, that we're passing that information and sharing that knowledge and between ourselves, right, and then hold the people, right, accountable for the ones who should be making things happen today.
Thank you very much. So now I'm going to ask you. Thank you for answering all those questions in the way that you all have. I'm going to ask you all now if you could sum up. It was going to be 2 minutes, but if you could do it in 1 minute, that would be great, because we're trying to keep to the 8 o'clock deadline if we can. And obviously say whatever you want to say, but you might want, I might suggest, give us some clues as to what the way forward would be. And that might include, I think the expression is white allies, white people who maybe really do want to help and maybe are really making an effort to help, what they can do, but also in relation to the Black Lives Movement generally, what the way forward might be. So can we go in reverse order to how we spoke? So Muhammed, if you don't mind starting off again.
I think the meeting today is actually a good sort of a good start, actually, right? If you're talking about the white allies, right? If more people, right, were willing to stand up and talk about some of the issues we're talking about, or as I said, about those lived experiences, if people came out and actually spent a day in say the person's shoes with them, going out and taking a look at the daily what they have to go through on a daily basis, or let the individuals just explain to you what happens to them on a daily basis. I personally think, right, that would be such a powerful start, right, in order to tackle some of these issues we're talking about.
Thank you, Muhammed. Antonia.
Well, I think, you know, with regards to white people, they should look at us as equals, and we got the same privilege as they. You know, we bleed the same. You know, the only difference is our skin color. I think we should all be treated the same and not be disrespected because of our skin color. You know, if they see something not right, they should speak up. Some people don't speak up. Like at the police station, no one really spoke up when there was about 10 of them, which they could have spoken up about it. And I think, you know, don't remain silent. You know, we are all one. That's how I look at it. And, you know, we've got all the same privilege. We should have all the same privilege, you know, whether it's living privilege, you know, speaking privilege, all sorts of privilege. I think it should be equal. And, you know, that's how the way it should be.
Thank you, Antonia. Gary, you're on mute. Gary, you're on mute.
Yeah, I think I just want to spend my minute talking a little bit about history and the importance of learning about and from history. That it was Sivanandan. He said, you know, we are here because you were there. But if you don't know that you were there, then you don't know why we're here. And all of these things, all of these moments, the statues and so on, they come out of nowhere. People don't, you know, so. And it's then left to non-white people to teach white people, the history of this country. So everybody will say we won the Second World War, even if they didn't fight. They'll say we won the World Cup even if they didn't play, but nobody enslaved anybody. Nobody raped anybody, nobody invaded anywhere. And unless there is a kind of a sense of collective responsibility for the history that we have in this country, then actually understanding why we're in this situation will always be a mystery.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you. Deryck.
Yes, I want to stick on the issue of culture. When I spoke of culture earlier, I didn't merely mean heritage and traditions and so on. I really meant culture of white privilege, which has its roots in two, it's rooted in two things that we need to address if we want to move forward. And one is this habit, I think it's a European habit, it could be a human habit, of wherever we see difference, we feel the need to have a hierarchy. And so you have black and white, and we therefore feel the need that white should be better than black. We need to address that reflects that habit. And secondly, this issue of beauty that we spoke earlier. So I want to leave you with a quote from the Honorable Rex Netterford, the late intellectual from Jamaica. And he said that we should not be so unsophisticated as to be racist, but we should not be so naive not to be race conscious. I think the black community would give that as a caution to the white community, the white allies. And the white allies should take it as aspirational.
Thank you, Deryck. Marcia.
Yeah, I'm going to try and wrap all of that up
Exactly.
in a very short time. But basically, white people should accept that there is institutional racism. We've been speaking about it for hundreds of years. It's not just something that's just happened now. In fact, when we were enslaved and people died and on ships and were chained, they were deaths in custody. So the deaths have been happening for decades and nothing has changed. It's just modern day lynching in different ways. The plantations are the prisons and the mental health institutions. Those are the things that were put in its place. And the deaths by the police, a police force and not a police service. We have to remember that these are human beings. And white working class people also are subjected to some of the issues that we face as black people. We are just disproportionately affected. And so it's important that everybody is educated from both sides to know their histories and support the campaign, support the inquest, the charity inquest that is there that supports families like mine who've lost their loved ones. It's an independent charity. And also the United Families and Friends campaign, a coalition of the actual families that are affected. Support us by signing the petitions. Check us out on Twitter and our Facebook pages. We have a memorial march at the end of October, Saturday the 31st. We want that to be a historical memorial, just like everybody came out for George Floyd, and black and white people are out saying Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter means that Black lives matter too, and that all lives matter. And until then, not everybody's lives matters. And so we need everybody to support this massive campaign and to bring public awareness and to put the pressure on the government to finally do something.
Thank you, Marcia. Thank you to all five of you. It's been a fascinating last hour, and I've certainly learned a lot, and I'm sure that the hundreds of people listening have learned a lot too. Thank you all very much. This is the end. I'll just say that Kensal and Kilburn Better 2020 will be back in the autumn, and thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Good evening.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you, guys.